So this is the primary user interface for the QVERA QIE interface engine, also known as QIE. So this is the main screen that you'll get to anytime you log in. A couple quick things I want to point out before we actually get into the application itself. Revolve more around the installation and the back end of the application. So QIE itself, if you're familiar, and you'll hear me do a lot of comparisons back and forth between QIE and ConnectR, obviously because ConnectR is your current platform and what you're familiar with. So I'll be able to make some comparisons between the two applications. If you've ever gone through an install of ConnectR onto a specific server, I don't know if we've done them for you, if you've had GE do them or Allscripts do them, but those typically can run anywhere from 4 to 6 hours to, I've seen some of them go, 1 to 2 weeks just because of issues with server setup. With the QIE application, we've done, I'm going to say probably close to 25 installations so far of the application for different purposes. And I've yet to have an issue with the installation, and it typically takes no more than 20 minutes to do a complete installation. Some of them are as quick as 5 minutes. So, for example, what we've kind of offered to some of the clients that we've done these demos for is the ability to install this on one of your workstations for you once we're done with the demo, so that you also have a kind of a playground area. And what we found is even doing those real simple installations, we're looking at, fire up a GoToMeeting session, get on, and within 5 minutes we've got a working QIE environment for you to start playing with. So just wanted to throw that out there, that just the ease of installation is significantly better than what it is with ConnectR. From a back-end perspective, talking about the database, QIE itself, once installed, comes with a database called H2. It's a file-based database system, which will sit on your operating system out on the file share. And obviously, as you receive data through and into QIE, obviously the data gets logged out to that flat file area, and then can be retrieved just as if you were using like a SQL or an Oracle backend to QIE. So the real nice thing about, again, with QIE is that we can get it installed. It'll have its own database. You don't have to worry about any other licensing for database needs, and for kind of that playground area, utilizing the H2 database is a great way to go. If and when you were to purchase it and you wanted to move forward and you were going to bring this into a full-scale production, obviously we would highly recommend using a SQL or an Oracle backend. Currently, we have only used the SQL backend, primarily because everyone that we're going into in this environment already has Allscripts or some other EMR that's already running on SQL. So they've already got corporate licenses, so we were able to, kind of piggyback onto those installations of SQL and just create extra databases for QIE. So again, that piece of it basically requires us to create an empty database, create a user, change a couple of the configuration setups within the QIE Service Manager window, cycle the service, and you're up and running, and QIE at that point will start talking to your SQL backend and store all data and interface mappings and all that stuff out to the SQL area. QIE itself can be set up and configured to do it basically does its own set of backups. They're not considered a SQL or a database backup, but it's basically a channel backup. So basically all of your mappings on a nightly basis get exported out to an XML file. So it's really nice that it kind of does it on its own. You can set the number of days to actually keep those. Typically on an install, it defaults to 14 days. So at any given time, you'll have 14 days worth of XML backups. So that's a real nice feature, such that if yesterday you made a bunch of changes, you come in today, make a few more changes, and realize that the changes you just made broke something, you can go right back to that backup, use their import functionality, much like you would do with ConnectR, You can import a specific channel, all channels, a translation table, whatever it might be, and you can import that right back into QIE and overwrite what you might have changed and be right back where you were the previous day. So it's a real nice feature, real quick to use. And unlike ConnectR's import-export features, where we have seen issues in the past where not all of it gets exported or not all of the mapping, say, gets imported, we've yet to see any issues like that within the QIE environment. So I'll pause there for a second. Any questions on kind of the installation or the back-end database?
Not so far. I was happy to hear the SQL piece there. That's good.
Yep, excellent. Okay. All right, so once you've logged into QIE, this again is your home screen. So this is what they consider your global settings area. So you'll see that you have a bunch of different options over on this side. And then you'll see over in the larger pane here, you'll see each of these individual sections, which are also listed over here as individual tabs on the left-hand side. QIE has this great concept called zones. And what's really nice about the zones is that it allows you to segregate your channels. And in the QIE vernacular, a channel is the same as an interface within ConnectR. So a channel consists of one source system that can be mapped out to many target systems, just like what you would see in the ConnectR environment. One of the additions within QIE is that a single source system, we'll go through all of these pieces, but one of the nice things about a specific source system within QIE is that it can actually maintain or handle multiple connections to that one source. So what that means is you may have 3 hospital systems. So currently in ConnectR, that would mean you have 3 independent source systems, system 1, 2, and 3 within ConnectR, that might be sending you registration data. Those might all have a different mapping set up to go to, let's say, your group management demographic inbound interface, so HL7 to HL7. Within QIE, you could actually set up one source system, and you would tell each of those 3 hospitals the same IP import to connect to, and we would utilize, for instance, data within the HL7 message, let's say the sending facility, the MSH3 I think it is. And you could actually utilize that value to tell you which hospital that data belongs to. And then within your mapping itself, you could direct the flow of that message to the correct mapping area. And then have one target node coming out of all that, which then feeds into the group management system. So lots of flexibility, lots of ways to consolidate what you might already have in ConnectR and bring all of that into QIE and kind of minimize the number of channels and the number of mappings that you might have in play. Again, also the ability with the zones allows you to, as I said, segregate out the different types of interfaces. So you could set up a zone that only contained all of your inbound reg-sched feeds, let's say from a group management into QIE, and then you wanted to maintain a single zone that allowed you to take each of those 2 inputs and kind of keep within that zone all of the different targets that those messages might go to. You then also may have a results zone. In this case, what you'll see here, this is again is my playground on my system. So you'll see that I've got a couple of different Allscript zones. We have an HIE zone, an IIS registry zone, a couple of the different organizations that we work with, the Frisia Company, the JARDOG's Follow My Health portal. So I'm able to easily jump between each of these different zones and look at the different channels that are defined within those zones. So again, just a nice way to keep it all segregated and kind of listed out how you might want to see it. With that, we also have the ability to set security. So as users log in and they've been set up by an administrator, you can restrict which zones those users will actually see here in this list, as well as in tab form over here, and then further restrict what they have for edit or view-only capabilities within a specific zone. So again, it really allows you to drill down into individual zones, individual interfaces, and really restrict or limit someone's access into the QIE environment. So again, so this is your global view here. You get to see all the zones, all the different pieces within those zones. If we go ahead and drill down into a specific zone, and I'll bring this guy up here, we have the ability to look at all the different channels. So again, I click on the channels here on the left-hand side, and that's going to bring up a list of all of the individual interfaces that are currently set up for that zone. I can also do a quick zone status look, and that will basically bring up a dashboard of all of those channels. And within this area, I'll be able to see, in this case, all of them are a color red, which means they're stopped. If any of them were running, this would be a green box with a little arrow, like a play arrow. And then over here, we would be able to see if, let's say, this one was in a green status, so it was started, we would be able to see how many messages total have been received, how many have made it outbound and completed that transition through the mapping. We would be able to see how many were currently in the queue. So this was the same as the queue column you would see within ConnectR on the status screen. We would be able to see if any messages were currently being processed and which ones were getting ready to be sent outbound. As well, we can see if any messages that had been received, gone through the mapping process, and before they actually hit the outbound target, if any of those had any errors. By clicking on any of these numbers, it immediately brings you into that channel, and then will bring up different tabs for you based on if there's any data currently there. So in this case, I clicked on the inbound feed, so that brings us into the channel setup. Again, unfortunately, because there wasn't any data that's actually gone through these, we're limited as to what we're going to see here for different tabs. But if we had processed data through here, I would actually have another tab here called the Messages tab. That's the same as your Message Log tab would be within the ConnectR environment. If I had clicked on the Errors tab, that would have, again, launched that channel, and I would see an Errors tab here, and I would be able to see all of the different errors that had happened within that interface. Let's see, we'll quickly go down the rest of the pieces over here on the left. So we have the ability within a specific zone to set up web service connections. What we would typically use that for, or what we have used it for, is our integration with the Phreesia portal as well as the JARDogs Follow My Health portal back to the group management system. So we have a web service connection that we can set up that allows us to talk to, on the group management side, there's an application called the Web Toolkit, or the Interoperability Toolkit, that was designed as basically APIs that allow us to talk directly to the database to retrieve and update data within group management without having to utilize an HL7 interface. We can also set up database connections. So in this case, because this is all scripts driven, we have, much like you would see an ODBC connection set up within your ConnectR server out at the actual OS level. We can set those connections up directly within the QIE environment. So again, pick which type of database we're talking to, whether it's a SQL, an Oracle, a MySQL. You can set up specific JDBC connections to other types of databases as well. Give it the host name, the schema, which is the actual database name, user, password, and immediately from there you can do a test connection that will go out and actually try and make a connection to that server, to that database using that username and password, and allow you right here to verify that all of your setup is correct. We also have the ability to set up translation tables. So in this case, they're called system variables within QIE. So in this case, I have different tables set up that I can go through and I can add and update to. I also have the ability to import and export those tables out to a CSV file. So that's a real nice feature. Within the ConnectR environment, you'd actually have to go back to the SQL level to be able to export a table as well as be able to import a table into ConnectR. So with QIE, you can actually do that right from the application itself. So as long as you're able to provide a CSV file, tab delimited, comma delimited, completely up to you, you're able to quickly import and export those tables for ease of maintenance, if you will. So you could export a table out, bring it into an Excel spreadsheet, maintain that table however you need to, save it back out to a CSV file, and then immediately import it right back in. All of that done through this one screen. Let's see. I'm going to hold off on, well, actually, I'll jump down here to the published functions. We also have the ability, so as in ConnectR, you would set up scripts. Within QIE, you set up functions. So here are some different functions that I've ported over from ConnectR into the QIE environment. So some of these may look familiar as they might be used with an Allscripts interface. So we have the check dictionary value, look up provider code by NPI, by name, by UPIN, and so on. And each of those, when we're defining them, allows us to define the input parameters that are expected as input from the mapping into the function call. And then within the function itself, we're able to set up our specific select statement out to the specific table name, column name, and value that was passed in. And then we're able to pass back either a true or false value or return value back to the actual mapping function or the actual mapping that was set up to call this. One of the things with, that I should have mentioned right at the beginning, is within QIE, all coding, all custom coding, I should say, is done using the JavaScript language. So unlike ConnectR, where you have the ability to script in both VB script and JavaScript, within QIE, it is singularly only uses the JavaScript language. So if you have some familiarity with VB script, it's a pretty relatively easy transition over to the JavaScript area. The nice thing is obviously with Google and the many, many websites that are available out there, there's a lot of help with that transition from VB to JavaScript. Okay. Any questions on any of these tabs over here?
Not so far.
Okay. One thing I do want to hit back on real quick, and we'll look at this when we actually get into the mappings, is with these translation tables, one of the things I like to point out is if you're familiar with a translation table in ConnectR, you can have up to 3 source input columns and 1 target output column, and you're stuck with that. So let's say you had a registration interface coming out of a PM system and feeding into your Allscripts EMR. You would potentially have to have, let's say, a translation table of group management provider codes to Allscripts provider codes. On the flip side, when you have charges coming back out of the EMR that you want to file into your PM system, you may have to have another translation table that goes from Allscripts provider codes back to the group management provider codes. So that would require you to maintain 2 tables within ConnectR. Within QIE, they do it slightly different, where you're allowed to maintain 1 table, you give it a name, and then you name each of your columns. So let's say in the case of the provider codes, you might have your first column is the PM provider codes, and your second column is the Allscripts provider codes. When you access or make hits against this table within your mappings, you actually get to specify which column is your source and which column is your target. So it allows you to maintain 1 table to do bidirectional translation. So again, just a real nicety to have, the 1 table to do all your maintenance in instead of having to maintain 2 for each direction of data flow. All right, so let's take a look at the channels themselves. So when you look at a specific channel, and let me pull up the registration one because that has a little more functionality built into it. So right away you can see that there's a big difference in the display of a channel within QIE as compared to ConnectR. Within QIE you have a real nice data flow schema that you can visually see on the screen to know that your green nodes are your source nodes, and you'll never have more than one source node per channel. You have your yellow nodes, which are your conditional logic nodes, and you can again have as many of those as you need within the actual mapping itself. Your blue nodes are all of your mapping logic, so that's actually taking, let's say, an HL7 record and manipulating it and putting it into either different fields or a different format and allowing you to manipulate that data. And then all of your purple nodes are your destination nodes. And again, you can have as many destinations as you want based on the flow of your data. Now you'll notice as I clicked on each of these different nodes, they all opened up at the bottom of the screen. So I can quickly go back and forth between any of those nodes. As I make changes, it's immediately saved. I can simply close down those particular nodes or those tabs and know that I've finished up the mapping changes that I wanted to make within those nodes. If I want to go back to a node because I realize I need to make another change, I simply click on it there. It opens it up here and allows me to look at all of the different mapping functions that are available or set up with if we're looking at a source or a target node. So let's take a look at the source node first. So within the actual source node, we have the ability to define what type of data is going to be coming in, whether it's going to be HL7, CSV, it's just a flat text file, XML, X12, bunch of different options available there. In this case, we've chosen HL7. We've chosen that it's going to be a socket-driven. Again, there's many options here as well. It could have been an HL7 flat file, so it would be a file-based system. With that checked, it would bring up different parameters, and these screens look slightly different based on the source value. So in this case, we've chosen the socket. So we come over to the socket configuration. It's going to ask us to define the port that the data is going to be coming in on, that you're going to tell your sending system to connect to. We have a button here that allows us to look at all of the different ports from all of the channels in all of the zones. So we can be able to safely tell which ports are currently in use and which ports are available. Let's see. So we're able to define our, what they call their block header and footers are the same as the begin and end envelope or start and end characters within ConnectR within a system definition. This is the checkbox here that I had mentioned where you can allow multiple systems to connect into the same port so that we could have multiple systems sending their data into this one source system. And then again, within our mapping logic, we can kind of following the arrows, we can figure out where each system's data should go through our mapping. We also have the ability to set up or define whether or not the connection will be persistent or non-persistent. We have the ability to set up the different acknowledgement responses. So we can simply say, you know what, we're just going to get the data. We're not sending any responses back. We can simply say, we just want to use the acknowledgement script, which is your standard MSH, MSA mapping, where we basically mimic back the data we got within the MSH, and we make sure that MSA1 is an AA for acknowledgement accept. You also have the ability to say, you know what, I don't want to acknowledge it right away. I actually want to get into the conditional or the mapping area. And I want to have that, one of those nodes, tell me whether or not the data was accepted by the other system. So it can be something as easy as, I want to be able to do some parsing of the data to make sure I've got everything, and then I'll let the sending system know. Or it might be, you know what, I'm going to go all the way through to my destination. I'm going to file that data into that other system, wait for their acknowledgement to come back, and then I'll let the sending system know whether or not that data was accepted all the way through to the receiving system. So again, some great flexibility here within the setup. You have the ability to load in sample messages. So this is a great feature that unlike with ConnectR, where you really are reliant upon the data that comes in from the sender, and you actually have to wait for a connection and wait for that data to come in before you can actually start viewing that data within the message log. With QIE, you have the ability to pre-populate some sample messages, so you could simply click on the Insert button, choose the format, give it a description, paste the values in here, click OK, and it'll save it out to our list. So in this case, we have a couple of sample messages already stored in here. So in this case, it's an ADP A28 message, all different kind of records that might be received in, say, from a group management system. And what we're able to do is bring this data up. We can click around in the message, and you'll notice that this value down here will change depending on where I click in the actual message. So this is telling you that right now I'm in the GT1-3 segment, and I'm in component 1. And as I move around, you'll see that those values change for us. So unlike, excuse me, a ConnectR where you would grid the message and it would actually have a definition that tells you GT1-3 is the patient name field, and within there you've got different components. Within QIE, you simply tell it it's HL7, and it simply allows you to kind of parse through each of the fields, and it'll tell you which field it's in. So the one of the things that is kind of missing from the QIE application that you might be used to from the ConnectR area is that they don't have the notion of message definitions themselves, where you actually type in or load into ConnectR an ADP message, and you would actually have to go in and actually type in all of the different fields that make up that message so that they have definitions to each of the fields. So one of the things with QIE is that it assumes that you have a working knowledge of HL7 and know what each of the different fields are. Again, with Google, with all of the documents available on the web, it's pretty quick to have those references available to know each of the different fields. And obviously, as you work with interfaces more and more, you'll become more familiar and comfortable with each of those fields and what they represent for data. Channel cache. So within the channel cache area, what this allows us to do is, and let me bring up a different zone where I actually utilize those values. I'm going to say cancel. And we're going to go into this guy. So within my source system, I do have some channel cache variables set up. So these are those variables, and those are going to be static throughout the life of the interface. What that allows us to do is within our mapping or our condition areas, we can make calls out to QIE that says, for this channel, I want you to go get me the value associated with control group. It will return back that value, and then we can use that value within our individual mappings. So what this allows us to do is define in one area a specific piece of data that either might be used in multiple areas within your mapping, and you don't want to have to, and if you know that it's something that might change, you only want to have one spot that you have to maintain. Any questions on the source node?
Nope.
Okay, great. All right, so moving on, we have different sets of nodes here. Let me jump back to the registration area. So again, as I mentioned, we've got our yellow condition nodes, our blue mapping nodes. So looking at the condition nodes, so this is where we would be able to, again, set up the flow of our data. So you'll notice that the green arrow comes out of the source node and drops, shows us that we're going to get data flow into this node here. Within this node, we're able to say, in this case, it's a very simple check that says, I want to look to see if the value in MSH9 equals ADT A34. If it does, then I'm going to follow this green check mark, and that's the flow of my data. If it's not an A34, then I'll know that the check failed. So we want to follow the red X and its path. So that means if it's not an A34, we're going to fall down to this condition logic. And within this conditional node, I'm looking to see if it's an A28, an A31, an A18, or an A29. And I can define how I want each of those conditions to be used, whether it's in an OR statement. I can change it so that it has to be an all and, or I could set it up to be a custom, which allows me to come in here and say, you know what, I actually want it to be if, oops, 1 or 2 or ANDed with 3 or 4. And I could do something like that, and I could set up my conditional logic that way as well. So it either has to be 1 or 2, or yes, it's either 1 or 2, and it's going to be 3 or 4. So there's many different ways that we can set up that particular logic. And again, based on that setup and the answers or the true or false return values from any of these checks, it will determine whether or not, again, we follow the green check mark or the red X. In this scenario, if it, again, wasn't any of these options, we fall down into a purple node. And in this case, it's what we call a discard node. So again, your purple target nodes can have many different functions. They could be, you're going to make a database call, you're going to drop that data out to a file, maybe you're going to do an FTP call and send that data off to another system. It could be socket driven, whereby you're going to send that HL7 message out to a different receiving system. In this case, I've chosen to discard. So what that means is we received an ADT message in, it followed this path, it wasn't any of the A message types that I was looking for. So I don't want my receiving system to even see that, so I'm simply going to discard it. Once it's discarded, we move back to the source system, wait for that next message to come in from the sending system. Let's see. From the conditional messages, so we can drop down from condition to another condition, we can go to a target message, or we could move on to a mapping node. Within the different mapping nodes, again, you can have different mapping functions set up. They could be standard mapping functions, which would look much like this, where you use their standard user interface to pick the specific node that you want to look at the piece of data from, and then what you want to do with that data. You want to do a check for equality, you want to see if it contains something, ends with something, whatever it might be. From there, you're going to present a value, and as you type and fill in your data up here, it automatically creates the JavaScript code for you down here. So if you wanted to start with the standard mode to get some of the JavaScript created for you, you can do that. And then I could click down here on the Customize. That gets rid of that upper area, keeps the JavaScript code that was just created, and then allows me to come in here and I can start typing in my own specific customized logic. Once I'm done, I save that off, and now I've got my own custom logic built into the actual condition instead of just using the standard logic. If you're, again, not that familiar with JavaScript itself, let me actually cancel out of that, and we'll come back in. If this is customized, you'll see that these guys up here, these toolbars, just became active. I can come in here and basically utilizing their code wizard, I can choose from some pretty simple, what they call the surround with. So I can choose some of the simpler, different syntax that might be used within JavaScript. So if I highlight or hover over, it'll tell me what each of these will do for me. If I go ahead and click on it, it basically took that line that I was currently on and it surrounded it with a for loop. So very quickly I can come in and actually start creating different JavaScript code just by kind of clicking through their code wizard. Likewise, I could come in and go to their QIE system functions, and the ones that I use quite a bit out of here are down in the stream utilities. So kind of like with ConnectR, where you would drag something from the source to the target side, you would highlight it, right-click, and it would give you all of your options to do a substitution, same thing as a replace. I could do a lowercase, I could do an uppercase, I could do a trim, which is the same as leading and trailing spaces. I simply click on those values, and it brings the syntax in for me and says, here's how we'd actually call the actual function, the trim function. And then it says what you need to put in here is your input string. So I would come back in here, I would get rid of that, and I might actually say, you know what, I want to take my source.get node, and the node that I want is my MSH9, and I would set my value equal to that. So what I've done is, right away, I've now taken the value out of MSH9, I've trimmed it to make sure there are no leading and trailing spaces, and dropped that into this value parameter. And I can save that and be done and have all of my coding all set. You can do the same thing within your mapping logic. Again, it can be, you can set up standard mapping logic. So I would come in here, it automatically defaults to standard. I could say, you know what, within PID 5.1, which is the last name field, I want to take that and I need to make sure that in my outgoing message that also gets mapped to, let's say, GT1-3.1. So I want to take my patient's last name and I want to map that to my guarantor's last name. Now, if I didn't know the actual node that I wanted, I could click on this little search button over here, and as long as you have at least one sample message stored within your source node, it will bring up that particular sample message. I can select the different ones available if this one doesn't have what I'm looking for. And it immediately highlights the field that I already had there. Again, tells me what the node path is and tell me what the current value is in there. And as I click around, it will update that field. I click refresh, and it will bring in the new value for me. So again, it's just a quick way to come in and say, yep, that's the field I want. That's my source. I click OK. Then I can come down and do my insert, and within my insert, I can do the same thing and say, yep, I need to make sure that that goes here. Click OK, and it brings that value in. And you'll notice that as I click around, oops, hit Enter, it brings and starts filling in the values down here. So again, this is not editable right now. I click Customize. It changes it to a customized view where, again, I'm now allowed to go in and write my own code. I click OK, and it will save that as a customized script or mapping function, if you will. From there, we would then, again, progress onto our destination nodes. So again, let me show you this one. This is actually a socket driven. So this, again, is going to take an HL7 message in. It's going to follow this green arrow here, hit this conditional. If that condition passes, it goes to my mapping. Once it comes out of the mapping, it will then get sent off to my target system. Again, I can set up all of the different parameters for that destination. So in this case, again, I can choose all of those same options, whether it's database, file, socket, web service, whatever. In this case, again, it's going to be a TCP/IP connection. So I'm going to specify the IP address, the port number that I want to send that data to. Again, we get to define what we want to use for our begin and end envelope characters. We can tell whether or not we want it to wait for an acknowledgement. If it waits for the acknowledgement, we can then tell it what we want it to do with that message if, in this case, it says, does the MSA1, which typically we would want to see an AA value back, and we can utilize this to determine whether or not we have an error. So if it did end up with an AR, which is an acknowledgement reject, that would tell QIE that the receiving system found an error or had an error, and then we can take and utilize this area to do something specific with that message. either send it all the way back. Like I said, we could tell the source target that we're not going to acknowledge that message until we get an acknowledgement back from the receiving system. So this is the area where we would come in and say, okay, it was actually an AR. So instead of doing a return here, we might have an if statement that says, if it's an AA, return, but if it's an AR, we need to do something else, and we need to send a message back to the receiving, the sending system to let them know what happened. Any questions about the channel setup?
No, I like the way that looks. That's, I mean, couldn't get any simpler than that in the flow charts, and this is pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, it definitely is extremely user-friendly. The other thing, again, how did I get all these here? Well, you've got all these little widgets up here. You simply click on one you want, you drag it down in, and you figure out where in the flow you want it to go. So if you decided, you know what, I actually need to do something with the data before I pass it on to someone, so I could just come up, highlight that arrow, delete it, reset the flow of my data so that I want to copy that message to come here first. I could do something within this mapping and then simply return that back up to that guy. So as quickly as that, I've been able to add in some new logic, redirect the flow of the data, and I can save it, cycle it, and I'm off and running. Let's see what else we want to look at. The testing functionality. So unlike ConnectR, where you make a change to your mapping, you have to wait for a new message to come in, or you might have to go in and hit the refile button within message log, and you have to let that message play all the way through the actual mapping. With QIE, when you hit the test button, again, if you have preloaded sample messages, you're able to select the different messages that are available. You can then take and step through your logic flow. And you'll notice that all of these nodes have a number associated with them. So as I click the step button, it highlights the node that I'm currently on. So again, I start from the beginning, starts with node 1, gets that data in, I click step, it says, okay, wait a minute, you've got a couple of different options that I can go to. Which flow do you want to look at? So in this case, I want to go look at the new logic I just put into this mapping. So I would select number 4, I'd click OK, it'll drop down to this node, and if I had different mapping functions set up here, it would list each of those. I can then step through each and every one of those mapping functions and look at, here's the before, here's the after, and look at how I've changed that data without having to actually send it all the way through to my receiving system. You can do this on the fly. So I could come in, make a change to the mapping, come back to the test area, click a reset, click a step through, and kind of keep working that data until I get it doing exactly what I want it to do. Once I'm satisfied with all the changes, I click Save. I click Stop, which stops the channel, breaks that connection. I hit Start. It starts it back up, and now all of my changes have taken effect, and the next message coming through will follow that same logic. Let's see, what else can we look at? As you create your functions that you want to use, again, I mentioned you can have them, let's cancel out of here. You have your functions available that you define here. You also can have your translation tables that you can define. There is this Promote to Global button. So if you recall, back up in our global section, again, we also have system variables and we have functions. In this case, they're called global system variables and functions. We have the ability to keep a table or a function just within a zone, or let's say we wrote a function and realized, you know what, I could use that function in a couple of different zones, but I don't want to have to replicate in each of those zones. I simply click the Promote to Global. It removes it from this area, brings it up to this area, so it would then appear in this list, and now I can access that function from anywhere within any of my zones that are defined. So again, a nice way to either keep stuff segregated or realize that, this could be useful in a lot of areas, and I can promote that up to the global area and have it accessible from all of my different zones.